So, Ben, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. I feel
You've been
like
good.
I was gonna say I don't think I have any more meetings today. I think this is like my last thing today. So done after this, man.
That's exciting. Uh,
I feel like I don't know if anybody else is actually working less with this, but I definitely feel like I am working. I wouldn't say significantly more, but I am definitely working more hours now that my desk is so close to the rest of my life. There's like no separation. Time and days don't matter.
so what I have found is I work probably more time dedicated. So it used to be that I'd walk around the office and I'd talk to people in the office, and you have like what I'd call downtime within your work schedule. And now I just have zero downtime. I'm working or I am like actively not working, like I'm going to get food and then returning to my desk to work. And so I'll work 10 hours and so much of it is Zoom or Teams or whatever. And when I walk home, I feel exhausted, which I could work a 10-hour day, which really was probably like 3 hours of work. Because if you've ever spent time with me, I generally am like talking the whole time. Uh, and now it's like I'm really tired. So, you know, it is what it is. Well, we are 3 minutes in, so I'm just going to get started. And as people join us, that's great. I have never run a Zoom webinar. So I'm going to start by telling you I'm very experienced with Zoom. Most of my customers are around the country, so I spend a ton of time on Zoom. But we're going to give this a try, and hopefully the conversation with Ben will go well. A couple things just to kind of get started. With Zoom, you can raise your hand or you can just put things in directly into the chat. There's also something called a Q&A. So I will pass the questions, regardless of how they come to me, to Ben as they come. Ben has received a list of about 20 questions, which we will probably cover about 3 of them, because in talking to Ben in the past, I know he will just keep going. And that's great for this format. So I'm going to let him do most of the talking tonight. But before we get started, I just wanted to say a couple things. First, welcome to TechBrew. It is virtual, as you can tell. Our hope is after the pandemic, it will not be virtual anymore. So I'm Tom Chapman. I work in Council Bluffs with the Iowa West Foundation and a variety of other groups. What we are trying to do is build a more robust entrepreneurial ecosystem in Western Iowa. As part of that, we meet usually at Full Fledged Brewing in Council Bluffs and have this meeting once a month. We're doing a number of other things that are associated with growing an ecosystem. I want to make sure that I give a call out to Marshall and his team. I'm really sad that we can't be at full fledged. Breweries, restaurants, service providers are particularly damaged during this pandemic. And so what we've done is we have actually gone out and purchased gift cards for all of you at full fledged so that he's getting the revenue as if we were in there today. If you would like those gift cards, please just email me an address and I will send you a gift card. I want to make sure I thank the Technology Association of Iowa. They're the sponsor of TechBrew across the state. There are 6 other TechBrews that go on during the year in different locations. I think only 2 of them are doing virtual meetings. So I think Des Moines and Council Bluffs are the only 2 doing virtual meetings. The next Des Moines meeting is in early May. Second, I want to make sure I thank our local partners, Advanced Southwest Iowa, Full Fledged Brewing, the Iowa West Foundation. And I also want to thank some folks on the Nebraska side of the river. So Nebraska Tech Collaborative and Tech Omaha have been really generous with helping us find speakers and help spread the word. I've known Ben, 15 years, 12 years, something like that?
I don't know. I feel like whenever Big Omaha started, I feel like is about the time that we met. So what year was Big Omaha 1 and 2?
'09 maybe? I think the 10th one was 2 years ago. So, and we're pretty close. So let's say it's 12 years. So we've known each other roughly for 12 years. But I think I met you before Dwolla was a thing or right at the beginning. So before there was a Dwolla and DSM t-shirt, I think we talked about Dwolla and you came over and we did a couple conversations. So do you want to kind of talk about where you came from and like sort of your entrepreneurial journey and just why you're here? I mean, like, what are you working on? What are you doing? So maybe an introduction of yourself rather than me telling your story.
Yeah, I can obviously give you a good abbreviated version. I don't know if it'll be good, but I'll give you an abbreviated version. Um, I started a manufacturing company first, which really, I guess, wasn't a manufacturing company. I built somebody a website who agreed to sell me speakers out of their shop at cost. And then I built my own website and started selling the speakers, and they drop shipped for me. And I started that company in high school, and I've kind of been building companies ever since, and was fortunate that that company turned into a manufacturing company because I realized that if we made our own speakers, essentially we'd get more margin and we could sell a better product at a lower price. And that had all kinds of different mutations, but I eventually ended up selling that to focus on building Dwolla. And if it was 12 years ago, that probably would have been at the time where I was trying to figure out how to sell my first company and also figure out how to finance Dwolla, because I was like piling all my money into it, which basically meant I was going broke. And that's kind of when I started researching and understanding how outside investors worked and all that good stuff. Got really lucky that I was able to sell the previous company, help finance the next one, found some early investors for Dwolla. And it still took me a year or two beyond that to figure out how to get the thing launched. Got lucky that we found really good partners here in Iowa, launched it for the first time about 10 years ago. So end of 2010 as a consumer product. Consumer product ended up kind of servicing about 1 million people, moving about $1 billion a year. And that was really cool because it proved out the technology, but it was not a great business to be in. And the ways in which we thought we were going to monetize it in the early days turned out to be completely different than the ways we actually could monetize it 4 years, 5 years in. So what ended up happening is we pulled the technology out, remarketed it to a different audience, but it was the same core technology. The different audience was not a business that the investors wanted to be in. And so we restructured and recapitalized the business about 4 years ago, which was interesting and turned out to be a really great business decision, because what we've got now is a much bigger business that's growing much faster than the old one, and I think has a really tremendous runway in front of it. Kind of focused for the last 4 years on perpetually replacing myself, and I've just replaced myself as the company's CEO. So we have a new CEO that's about 3 weeks in. We've been onboarding. And why am I here, Tom? It's just because you asked me to be here. Anytime you ask me to be somewhere, I'm going to do it.
That's very kind of you. You answered all 3 questions. Usually people only answer one, which is why I just keep giving. I throw softballs, and you can take a lot of pitches. So can you talk a little bit about what you kind of talked about the pivot 4 years ago, but can you talk about what Dwolla sells today, how that's different, how the payments environment has sort of changed over the last 10 years, and just the things you have learned within that process with regards to how to find a market and customers?
Yeah, sure. There's lots of stuff to unpack in there. And I think that the core focus for Dwolla is providing programmable payments. And really what that means is, or what it means to us, is that we're living in a world in a future that is more and more every day more programmable. Your toaster's programmable, TV's programmable, your car's programmable. Things are more and more becoming programmable, and payments are becoming more embedded in those things. Our software allows you to essentially utilize the building blocks, which are different types of transfers, customer types, assets, and move them around between pieces of software. Pieces of software are used by people, and normally that money is moving around because of what those people do. Now, it gets complex and pretty abstract, but at the end of the day, all we're doing is enabling programmable payments to be embedded into software regardless of the end user of that software. We also think there's an interesting trend coming that the software and the transactions that are initiated through software are going to be more and more initiated by machines and by automation as opposed to humans. And we feel like there's a wave of opportunity there that's going to continue to change how payments work on a global level. The thing that I think we've learned about finding an audience for our product is that your behavior changes when you're trying to sell a product versus trying to build usage of a product. And that seems super obvious to say out loud, but the first Dwolla was founded at a time when we were essentially building a company that was designed to build network effects. This is when Twitter, Facebook, even Zynga, various companies were building enterprise value off just network effects. There wasn't really revenue attached. And so the second Dwolla has been very revenue focused, which is a benefit because it gives us the opportunity to say, who is the core client for this? Who gets the best value out of it? What types of developers really want to make use of what we're very good at? And really focus and fine tune our messaging on those questions. And I think I didn't get all the questions in that one time. I think I missed a few.
That's a really good answer though. I'm going to follow up on something you said. You said it allows you to focus on what kind of developers want to embed your programmability. Can you talk a little bit more about where that exists today for Dwolla? Who are those developers?
Well, they're certainly not everyone, which is an interesting quagmire of selling a developer-focused product, is that not everybody can buy it. And even if everybody could afford it, not everybody can figure out how to use it. So many times our clients are coming into us as product managers of a new product, or as a founder or VP of blank at a relatively early stage company. And they're typically looking for a way to move money between bank accounts. They want to program a payment that moves money from point A to point B. So they search for things like bypassing ACH with an API, or ACH API, or no batch, please webhooks. Like, you end up finding these unique search terms that help that particular profile of developer find you. But above all, it's referrals, Tom. It's having a great product people love that they'll tell friends and other companies about. That is, from my perspective, by and large, a huge advantage for us is the referral base of just saying, I use this API and this was great. It saved us 2 years. You should use it too. And as people move company to company, especially big enterprise companies, they typically start to take their vendors with them.
That's really interesting. I have about 3 questions. So you talked a little bit about kind of a combination. I'm going to ask 2 different questions, and I'm going to ask them and let you pick a path. So question number 1 is, you talked about the idea that some of your consumers find you via search. Question number 2 is, some of your consumers find you via referrals. And you said a lot of it is through referrals. So I think there are a lot of people on the phone, as I look through the list and the people I know, who are interested in that first batch first. So why is search important for your company? And then how do you ensure that you maximize search?
Well, I think, SEO, if you do it right, is probably the lowest cost way to acquire new clients. And there are also things that you can build on top of it. And many of the things that you can build on top of it are not my specialty. So one of the reasons we just hired a new CEO is I'm really good at like the early stuff. But then when you want to take that and actually roll out a go-to-market strategy where you're building kind of a monolith team to go out and acquire more of the market, it's just not my specialty. On the SEO side, though, by focusing on not the terms that are popular, but the terms that your clients are probably searching for, you end up with super low cost early user acquisition. For us, it was ACH API. Now, a bunch of people are, kind of blowing up the cost to use that keyword, but we find new ones that I'm not going to share with you because I found out that if I share the keywords, everybody just starts using them. But I think the best thing to do with SEO is pick up a SEO for Dummies book and read it, and just follow best practices. It's amazing that if you use the right keywords in the right place and have the right amount of content supporting that keyword, how quickly it will be referenced as a high quality article. And the hack is just do the work and produce good content. And it's also great to take good content and share it with other publications that might be super niche industry publications. Like, that's not TechCrunch, that's Payment Journal News for a payments company, right? And I just made that up not to call anybody out, but every industry vertical has these niche publications that are specific to them. And I think if you create that really great content, you can get it republished in those. And that drives link backs, that drives value, that drives traffic. Okay, well, like, you got an early flywheel going. One of the reasons we didn't change Dwolla's name when we changed the company is because we had so many backlinks from early press articles that actually gave us a good SEO juju and allowed us to attack and kind of win at specific keywords pretty quick.
Smart. So you touched on this a little bit, but I get this question all the time where they'll say, oh, you know Ben, or you know fill in the blank of whoever. What do they actually do all day? Like, what is their actual job? Not what's their title, but what are the sorts of things that you spend your time on?
Yeah, it depends on the day, Tom. You know, I like a bunch of other people was trying to manage how to keep my kids busy and fed this morning while doing conference calls. But, you know, today I spent my time with other board members, with the senior leadership team, on client calls, doing things that are driving value for the company. And how that manifests itself tends to follow themes on a week, month, and quarterly basis. But every day is a little bit different. It's more similar now that we're literally working on our homes every day, but like the actual work itself is pretty darn dynamic.
So how much did your job change when you moved out of the CEO role and into the role as chair, right?
As a founder, you're always an owner. And the relationship that you have with the business as an owner is completely role independent. And while I am the chair of the board, I've also been the chair of the board since day one. So what roles I have as an owner and as a steward of the business, and what roles I have as the chairman, and then what roles I have as the CEO, I still have 2 of the 3 jobs, right? They're just not jobs you can apply for. They're jobs that you kind of end up with if you get lucky. And in many cases, I am very, very, very lucky in that way. So in the short term, we're working on getting Brady onboarded. Brady has a number of internal initiatives that are really important to the company and are probably going to take us 60, 90 days. So a lot of my time is supporting Brady and doing things that I think are going to help enable him and the teams, supporting the senior leadership team and helping make sure that things don't drop, supporting the board and outside investors with questions. We are definitely not done. We are gearing up to take another really big swing, and I feel like it's freed me up to work on some more product-oriented type work, which has been great. I haven't exactly been totally freed up yet. We're still working on onboarding, right?
You kind of blew through this part of your life, but the part I always thought was great was you talked about building speakers in Newton, Iowa, and sort of just your genesis to then say, well, you know what the problem was? The problem was payments were always a pain for me. And so I started looking into it. I'm wondering if you want to talk a little bit about how you got into sort of the payments technology industry and what you, if there are people in the audience who are thinking about where to go for a good business idea, what you thought was great about your discovery of the opportunity with Dwolla and what you would be like, should have done something different.
I've always been like, I always chase what I've intellectually been passionate about. And that intellectual passion for how to figure out some of the stuff with payments was initially just selfishly me trying to solve a problem. And the tool that needed to exist in order to solve that problem was software. In my previous company, when we were building a speaker, more often than not, the problem to be solved was a vendor. It was a part. We had to create the part, get it produced with a low variability so that there was a low failure rate. You know, like the number of things that you can move in a physical product were pretty de minimis by comparison to the number of things that you can move in a piece of software. But either way, each one of these things is just a building block. So speakers, physical objects, or software are building blocks that have an outcome. But the nice thing about software is like infinitely variable. It has n number of evolutions and can solve so many other problems at scale that a physical thing cannot. And I think that's really exciting. But from a technology perspective, you know, the whole reason I started getting into building websites and things like that was as a way to sell product. And that was a product that I was really passionate about building. The reason I got into customization was largely due to a friend who taught me about like what PHP was and how CSS worked, and then got into JavaScript, and then got into how to configure some of these things to interact with a certain type of database, and then how to build relatively dynamic applications. But these were all things that I had a friend who was kind of saying, well, dude, if you do it this way, it's crazy. What about this? And there's always sort of been someone there teaching me and guiding me how to accomplish the thing that I'm trying to solve for. And software has just been like the way in which to solve for this set of problems for a long time.
We did get a question ahead of time. I'm probably going to pronounce this incorrectly. Evgenia from London. So she asked, what are your top 3 challenges leading Dwolla during these times of uncertainty?
COVID-19 sucks for everybody. I think that if we can admit that, and that what is happening to us is not unique to us, but working in technology, many of us are actually very fortunate that we still have our job. And I think that behooves us to remember when it feels inconvenient that we have a responsibility to be a good steward of our company and our community and try to do more to help people in need who right now really need it. I think the fact that it's 5 p.m. and all of us are hanging out on a Zoom, like we're probably in a pretty fortunate group. And I think sharing that with the team is important. And also a big part of my job right now in demonstrating leadership is enabling a new CEO and also remembering what it is that the team needs to hear from that person as well. And sometimes leadership means not saying much and being a good listener. And I'm trying to do more of that right now.
You talked a little bit about, I'm going to put words in your mouth, about how we're pretty lucky. What is a thing that is going on now due to the pandemic that you would say is like a silver lining or a blessing in disguise, or something that's going on, whether it's personal or professional, that you've discovered that you maybe wouldn't have, but for sort of being forced to live and work 4 feet from you?
Well, certainly one thing personal is like my kids are glorious. They are blowing my mind with how much of a unit they have become and how good and kind and supportive they are for one another. I couldn't make lunch because I was on a conference call. So today one of my kids just made lunch and like served it up. I didn't really know he could do that, but took care of it. And everybody was happy and just doing their own thing. Tom, I hope for all of us that there is a change in sort of like a return to truth in the world, where a lot of people don't like that is not the type of stuff that makes an argument. There's a lot of qualitative repetition that seems to be happening across the country. And I'm very hopeful that we start seeing a return to truth, a return to data, a return to what's actually happening, as opposed to just like saying shit that's untrue. And that is something I very much hope for.
That's really interesting. Another question that I like to pivot towards when we do these is I like to just ask you about technologies that you're excited about. So what are things that are happening that you either get to be exposed to because of what you do, or just stuff that you're like, wow, this is just whiz bang cool? What are some of those technologies that are exciting you right now?
I think distributed automation is going to continue to change the way our lives work. I think that's really cool. I think there is eventually going to be an overarching trend that maybe it's spawned or it's accelerated by COVID-19, but the sort of connection between the physical space and the virtual space and the analysis that happens in between is something that I'm absolutely fascinated by. We're starting to see it play out with COVID-19 of apps of download this app and you'll be notified if there are COVID-19 outbreaks in your area, and the way in which we tell you that is basically looking at where you're traveling, where are the reported cases, are you traveling near those reported cases, or where we think those people were based on device data over like a trailing 30-day period. I think that is fascinating, sort of getting down to what is the statistical probability that X will happen to you, and you opt into that insight because you download an app and entrust an engineer to map your physical activity with sort of all these virtual things happening and data points. I think that's fascinating.
Interesting. So if you cannot answer Dwolla to this question. If you had to pick one company name that comes to mind when you hear the word disruptive, this is another one of Evgenia's questions. What would be the company?
It's Cloudflare.
Cloudflare. Interesting. Why?
Cloudflare is changing the way information moves throughout the world, and no one really knows it. I feel like when the data store goes to the edge and it comes off of big old databases, and instead of round trip times being seconds, it becomes tens of milliseconds. There's no reason that when a computer can choose what route to take to ask a question, they choose the thing that takes 2 seconds, and computers are getting smart enough to ask the faster computer the question. I think Cloudflare is gonna, I think if they're already, but will continue to become a core piece of the fabric of the internet from my perspective.
That's really interesting. So I'm going to let other people ask questions. So if you have questions, please just write them into the chat. So I'm going to give everybody a second to type. If nobody types, you're getting more of me, which, you know.
I just turned on my space heater, Tom. Just getting comfortable.
Is it cold? You're in Des Moines. Is it cold there? It's been cold here. Like I went for a walk. It's like 40 degrees.
Yeah, it snowed this morning. I don't know what it is right now, but we were in the middle of a basement renovation that the contractors got sent home when all this started, and there is no heat in this room, which is where I work all day. So time for the space heater.
So the first question is from Naveed, and it's a producty question. The question is, how do ledgers and wallets fit into Dwolla in the future?
Well, ledgering at scale is one of Dwolla's core competencies. And that core competency has really played itself out over time through work in our own products, but also in our contributions with the Bill and the Melinda Gates Foundation and various other projects that we've engaged in. So I think that as we look at the future, we really start to consider what applying that ledgering infrastructure looks like to additional currencies and asset types. And the sort of initial evolution of that idea manifested itself in a feature called labels, which is really massively scalable sub-accounting that is most applicable to regulated financial institutions, where it's highly performant, it's virtually infinitely scalable as far as we know, and can track. Today it's designed for USD, but we've already started to do the work to be able to track any other currency at the same speed. I think that's going to continue to be a major opportunity for Dwolla. Wallet is more of a question of what is the right structure for money to sit in when it stops, as opposed to when it's tracked. Ledgering tracks, wallets hold. And we've always had the perspective that money should sit with regulated financial institutions or with the custodian that is implied by the value type, which we think of as an asset. And it's weird to talk about this because it gets abstract the more you explain, but at the end of the day, there's an overarching thing that's happening right now is that banks are becoming more open. In Europe, they have things like PSD2, which is the mandated opening of the bank infrastructures. In the United States, open banking is becoming more of a bank opt-in in order to build new opportunities. And so we think the world is now more ready to connect to technology like ours than ever before. And the banks, as the custodians of the wallets, are becoming easier to connect to. And that maybe there's less for Dwolla to do on the wallet side, which is probably a good thing in the long term. We're a technology company, not a bank.
The next question is kind of a change of gears, and I'm going to ask 2 questions. Question number 1 is Dwolla. Question number 2 is everyone else. And the question is is Dwolla going to make any permanent long-term changes based on the experiences so far with COVID-19? And so I would say you specifically, and then do you think other companies will either match, be similar, be radically different?
I think all companies are. There's no way a global pandemic doesn't change the inputs and analysis of capitalism. And we are ourselves monitoring the situation, considering what the right way is to continue to focus on building the company as aggressively as we want. But Dwolla, like many of your companies, is in a state of receiving information and building plans. What we did from an internal perspective was move to a work from home situation really quickly, because we felt like that was the right thing to do for our employees. What the right thing is long term in the context of the business's execution and vision, I think we'll know more in about 90 days. It just takes a little bit to work through the system.
Do you think Dwolla is unique because you are a software company? Do you think that you will see radical changes to, I'm going to say, bricks and mortar and regular life? Like how different do you think your day will be in a year? Assuming you're at home.
I hope I'm not in this basement, Tom. I so hope I am not in this basement in 12 months. But, like, the thing about commerce and the thing about the economy and the thing about programmable payments is money's got to move. And what we're seeing is that the way in which our clients and our clients' end users are interacting with their software applications is changing, but it's changing universally. And we're seeing that point of sale applications might see less overall settlement volume because people aren't going into the store. But actual platforms for distributing loans, that usage is way up. It's skyrocketing, right? So on one side, you have one thing going down, and on the other side, you have a thing going up. And what I think I can safely say is that what the balance is, we don't really know. But as a business, we're able to scale up and scale down really quickly because of our infrastructure and because of the way the platform's built. So fundamentally, our product doesn't change. And what the product is good at, scaling quickly and on demand without creating really burdensome requirements like a bank provider might, is our core competency. So we think even though there is new stress in the system, there's new opportunity that probably wasn't there before, because for the first time, there is a very real need, for example, to distribute money to businesses today and not wait for 7 days for the check to show up because they might miss payroll in that amount of time. Well, those are areas where we can be really helpful.
That's interesting. So there's actually two different paths. Some people want to go back to talk about Dwolla, and some people want to talk a little bit about you. So I'm going to stay with you for a second. And the question is really about self-care. And I'm gonna kind of construct the question. So Dana asks the question. She's asking about routines, activities, and self-care, and whether or not you have to build it more frequently into your sort of life because of COVID-19. I want to go a little bit broader. I know you to be a very thoughtful and sort of somebody that is reflective about your life, and you're intentional about doing a bunch of things. And so I want to ask you, how do you think, one, you were doing before COVID-19? What does it reveal to you? And then how do you work forward kind of with those revelations with regards to self-care and just sort of your attitude and mental awareness?
I think self-care is super important to come at, honestly. And I don't know how wise it is professionally to be vulnerable with others on that topic. And so many people I recognize are also in a different position where I can be vulnerable with you about my own self-care and my own well-being. And I don't have to even question whether or not that impacts me negatively. It doesn't matter. I could be having the worst day in the world and just like bare my soul. And I think my existence is the same tomorrow. That took me a long time to realize I had that amount of safety. And to get there, I mean, I've had a bunch of coaches. A coach is a shrink, right? And I think if you have those resources right now, I would encourage you to use them. We're all as a society facing internal dialogue right now that we've never faced. And you alone in your home with your loved ones are probably no better equipped than I am or was to come at how to like resolve the inner dialogue. And so we just encourage you to reach out to others for help if you're feeling really stressed. Thankfully, a lot of healthcare programs are now covering that type of assistance. And in the absence of that type of assistance, constant contact with loved ones, family members, is really, really important. I know that one of the biggest things for me that's been a problem is my activity level has like tanked. When I was at work, my amount of activity, like if I kind of use the Apple Watch as a barometer, I'd close the rings 3 times. But if I want to close it once working from home, I have to like get on the exercise bike 3 times, which is really hard to do actually. That's helped me sleep better, which has helped me be more present. And so I think at the end of the day, I just try to be mindful of it. And also my partner is really incredible. And if I'm falling off the rails, I think she's going to pull me aside and say, hey, take some time here.
Do you want to give a pitch for Jamie's business, by the way, and kind of what she does, or do you just want to keep moving?
Well, Jamie is incredible. She should be doing this, not me. And Jamie shut down her business to focus on homeschooling the kids during this.
Ben's wife is an incredible photographer.
Yes.
Sorry.
No, she runs a company called Confessional and would encourage you to search it and think about ways in which that business could be helpful to you post-pandemic. She is definitely the operator of a small business that can't continue to operate in the middle of all of this. And that has been very humbling for our family in many ways. But I know that she, like many other small business owners, are excited to really hit it hard when the world kind of opens back up again. But Creative Confessional, she's an incredible photographer and mixed media artist, and is also doing mixed media projects that are things like digital collages right now and things like that in the absence of being able to do a physical shoot. And I know she's cooking on some new ways to shoot conferences that are done remotely, and creating bodies of artwork, but we just haven't done it yet. I know she's excited to share more. Maybe when we're done here and I say, hey, we've been talking about what this is, can you show me? She'll have something to share.
That's awesome. How did you become the person that you are? So I really want to ask about your entrepreneur journey, but I'm trying not to bias it towards like, what were the things that mattered in your life? Because I am just more curious, how did you end up being an entrepreneur and being into this?
I have a propensity to act. I don't understand waiting to do things that are important. And when I was young, a whole bunch of people around me died and left me with an interesting view of waiting to do things. And there was a point where I realized I couldn't control people dying, but I could control using my time to produce things I was proud of. And you know, I think that's it. I think that was a turning point in my psyche.
That's amazing. Can you talk a little bit about how you instill that activity to your kids and people around you? The idea of doing stuff and not waiting?
My kids are probably struggling with that more than anybody else because they don't know an environment where it is acceptable not to act. There are times where there is a duty to act because there is something that needs your help. And those kids, until they leave this house, will not see a different behavior, I don't think. Separately, they are encouraged to talk through things and be very vulnerable. And Jamie is very good at helping to draw that out. And like any parent, I'll know when they're 25 if we did the right thing or not. But right now, we're just trying to be a decent role model, you know?
I hear you. I'm going to pivot us back towards Dwolla technology. Some of the questions are they're kind of targeting the time when you guys made the pivot 4 years ago. Do you want to talk a little bit more about your thought process, the strategy that went into it, how you, maybe even how you talked to the investors and said, hey, what's going on? Just a little bit more about that time period and things that were going on and kind of how you made the jump.
Yeah, there was a period of time where we were beginning to realize that our strategy to distribute a consumer-facing product and build revenues after the product was distributed required a user base much larger than what we had. We really got to about 1 million people on the platform and in the product, but to achieve the numbers we had hoped for, we needed more like 15 million, 20 million. And that's not an easy thing to just go 10x your user base like that. And so we started looking at and asking ourselves some really honest questions about what are we really world class at? What are we second to none, best in class, maybe best in the world at, period. And we realized it was infrastructure. And the buyers of the infrastructure were businesses and financial institutions. And so we started talking directly to businesses about what it would look like to buy our infrastructure more directly. What we heard was they wanted to take our name off of it. Thus, we built a white label product. And we heard from financial institutions that if we could, and this was largely biased because of our relationship with, at the time, the world's largest exchange, was that if you can help us remove risk from the system. And we started to find a solution for something called per stat risk, which is actually pretty meaningful. And simultaneously started looking at selling it directly into businesses and directly into banks. And the bank solution was super, super, super sexy. And if that works, your software is in the middle of trillions of dollars worth of transactions a day. How you do that and don't become classified as a systemically important enterprise is anybody's guess. It's a huge swing and it's hard to do. And we were really good at the core parts of the system. But the thing that sort of kind of turned over was that we decided that while we were selling these two things, we were going to sell both simultaneously to see if one of them would work. And the business product, the white label product, was sort of like a slow slog. It worked a little bit. It kept working a little bit better. There was good iteration. And the bank product instantly got like really great attention from the world's biggest banks. I started basically living in New York for the week over a 6-month period, going big bank to big bank to big bank to big bank, teaching them how real time works. I wore a really nice suit every day and like just went in and did the thing for 10 hours a day and really like threw the kitchen sink at it. We had a banner deal at a banner valuation with banner partners, and what ended up happening is we were just building it up to basically go into business with the world's largest exchange and all the world's biggest banks. And we're going, but the deal didn't get done. And then the deal didn't get done. And then the deal didn't get done. But in the meantime, we kept hiring and we kept ramping and we kept getting ready for it. And we basically set a timeline and said, look, we're going to do this until this date. And if it's not done by this date, we're going to pull out of the financial institution product because it's so expensive to build and maintain. And we're going to go all in on the direct-to-business product, which was called white label at the time. And that day came and we were faced with a very serious question of, are we going to do what we said we would do? And the answer was yes. So we decided we were going to have to reduce headcount. We were going to have to get out of the direct-to-bank product. We were going to have to throw everything we had behind the direct-to-business product, and we were going to deprecate our consumer product. And all of that happened really, really, really quickly, and we didn't look back. And that's what happened.
That sounds really hard. Can you talk a little bit about what your investor said? I imagine they weren't delighted, some of them.
You know what, Tom, this was, in some ways, I think this is what you would hope for in an investment, is that people ruthlessly go to execute to deliver on this thing. in other ways, it's humbling for everybody involved when it didn't work on the timeline that you wanted it to. And it is hard for everybody in a way that is really difficult to describe, but is still nowhere near as hard as something like COVID-19 is for many families. So I think the sort of like range of hard is probably somewhere in the middle of like a not anywhere close to a loved one getting sick, like I know so many people are dealing with right now. So I think it's important for me to kind of recognize that it's a hard thing at work, and it's a hard thing to lose people at work that you care deeply about, and it's a hard thing to admit you're wrong, but it is a far worse thing to act like you don't need to make a change. And we needed to make the changes. We did make the changes. In a retrospect, good for the business, good for the investors that supported us through the change, but still hard, still really hard.
Is that the hardest thing you've done professionally?
No, definitely not.
Can
It's up there.
Can I ask what it was? I'm not trying to pry. These are softball questions, so I'm not trying to get you way, deep in something. I usually tell the story about the first time I had to fire somebody, and I fired somebody and I was crying afterwards. And like people say, well, why was that so hard? It was because I loved the guy. He was like a really good guy. And I remember talking to my dad, and he said, it doesn't get easier. Like if anything, it gets worse. And so
it's really interesting, Tom, because love is not a word that we are sort of taught to bring into the workplace.
Yep.
And it is not a word that a manager is taught to associate with quote unquote employees. But as a founder and as a business owner, I don't approach things by default as like an employer-employee relationship. And that's something I've had to get over time. But I think the hard part about those changes is not the change in the business. It's firing people that are doing a good job. And knowing that when you hire someone and they make a commitment to work with and for you, that you have a meaningful impact on their family and how things work at home. Yep. Doing things like removing their ability to provide, while it might be a reality of the world, it's a really, really, really shitty feeling. But at the same time, I don't think I have any right to allow myself room because what they're going through is so much harder. And focusing on how can I best help you, even though I don't have control of the situation. And even though you probably really hate me right now, what is the right way for me to set you up for success, provide references, provide introductions? Like, what can I do that is on the right side of this, even if I was a big part of us both you being on the wrong side of this, right? You being someone that has to be let go because the plan didn't work. It's really tough. And that's it. It's really tough, and it's a hard part about this line of work. But again, in the context of what a lot of people are dealing with right now, I feel very fortunate.
So I have a variety of questions that I've received via email and other places that are asking sort of the same type of question, which is, what is your advice for people that are just getting started? What is your advice for fill in the blank, raising money, hiring your first person, building your team, et cetera? So if you're just getting started, what do you think is most important to kind of?
I just think it's important to be passionate in a borderline manic way about what you're about to do, because people that are not passionate in an almost manic way about solving problems that they're going to spend 5 or 10 years on, they give up. And that for a company to fail because some key people gave up is a really meaningful thing. And when you're going to start a company, it's just important to know, am I really bought into this? And I myself am 10 years into this current project, and there's another 10 years on the other end of this. And I think it's important to think about decisions in the context of how it impacts the macro opportunity and not just me in the short term. That's an important not a personality trait. I think it's an important part of considering getting started for folks to really take really seriously. Because if you're really passionate and you're really good, you're going to find support from customers, you're going to find support from team members, you're going to find partners, but like that really meaningful passion at the beginning that doesn't fall away over time, that's such an important thing. I've never understood getting into business for the sake of being in business, if that makes sense.
You are so good at this. I don't know if you know how good you are at talking to people and with people, but like
I'm talking to you, Tom. You're the only one I see.
You always give me the chills. Like hanging out with you is always one of my favorite things about, you mentioned Big Omaha, but we see each other periodically at other events and things of that nature. And like every time I talk to you, I'm just like, God, he's cool. So
That's
I
nice
want to make sure I say thank you because you're really doing me a favor here because I have like 7 pages of notes. I've got all sorts of stuff that I was like, that's good. That was really good. So thank you very much. I see that a bunch of other people are saying this is incredible, this is fucking awesome, etc. in my comments. So I don't know if you're seeing that, but
no, I got it all turned off, but I should look at it.
So I just want you to know, like, I really appreciate it. So thank you very much. And I'm gonna kind of cut us off here, but I would just reach out to everyone and just say, please, if you have questions, I can relay them to Ben. If you have other things that we didn't get to, I'm happy to help you point in the right direction. And then if there are other things, I think Ben really hit on some important parts, which is if you're struggling, please talk to somebody. And if that's us, then that can be us. And if you're a founder and you need some help, feel free to reach out to a variety of the resources. I know there are a bunch on this call. So, I know Advanced Southwest Iowa, Chapman and Company, Technology Association of Iowa are all on this call. So I want to make sure that I say thank you to Ben, but also thank you to all of you for joining us for TechBrew. So thanks very much. You're awesome, Ben. Thank you.
Appreciate you, Tom. Thanks for having me. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
See y'all later.